Boys ready?
Ready.
Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. Today's episode, we've got Benjamin B.
What's happening, everyone?
And we also have somebody else here by the name of, well, I know him as Rabbi Mark. I don't even know your real name. Like your
It's Mark Rodenberg. Rabbi's my title because that's what you do when you spend $100,000 on seminary. You're like, here's your paper. So like when somebody sneezes and you go, bless you. Like, I can do that.
Okay. All right.
The whole thing.
Hey, listen, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, whichever one it is that you choose to use. And thank you for tuning in on YouTube. If in the end you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, we want to help you turn your mess into your message, right, Ben?
Yes, sir.
How you doing, Ben?
I'm great.
Yeah?
Yeah. I'm excited today.
How was your weekend?
What did I do this weekend? Football kicked off. I don't know if I mentioned that with Weston, so it's back to the grind with practices 3 nights a week, Saturday games. It's go time.
Okay.
It's fun, though,
Good.
watching them hit kids.
Rabbi Mark?
Yeah.
How was your weekend?
Well, it was good, actually. I spent a lot of time. I do the same thing every weekend. Go to home group, go to meetings, hang out with sponsees, take people's inventory.
Nice.
Talk shit, sit in the back of a meeting, figuring out who I want to murder.
Murder?
Well, I mean, theoretically speaking.
Like, just in your head.
Well, character assassination, to quote Dr. Bob.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Maybe just a not so polite form.
So why don't we tell them what Rabbi Mark does here?
Well, yeah, we'll get there. I do want to preface though that there could be some not so clean language in this episode.
Probably going to happen.
Yeah. So if you have little ears listening, which I don't imagine you would, I don't know why. We've never said that this is a children's show. But in the event that your kids are within earshot, you may want to reevaluate that decision because Rabbi Mark is, despite being a rabbi and having a certificate, he's got a fair choice of words. But with that being said, this will be one of those episodes that I think you'll quickly understand that Rabbi Mark has a lot of insight and education and is a lot of wisdom to offer when it comes to sobriety and in particular 12-step work and stuff like that, to the tune of we've entrusted him to actually come here to Rock Recovery Center and run group for us twice a week. And I can confidently say that every time I ask the community in terms of like groups and stuff like that, preference of groups, your group is always up there, so I think there's something to be said about that.
The feedback that I get is he's the one that opens up their minds to new concepts that they weren't willing to accept before. They were presented in a certain way, and I guess just the way you present things gets people saying, oh, that makes sense. So,
and that would lead me into, and this again, as every podcast that we do, Mark, it is, do you prefer Rabbi Mark or Mark?
It doesn't matter, really.
Okay.
Whatever you want.
Hey, like some doctors are like, oh, I'm doctor.
Well, technically, I'm a doctor.
Well, doctor, Mark.
Yeah, it's technically Dr. Rabbi or Rabbi Doc. I don't really care.
Good, because I don't either. It's organic, nothing scripted, anything like that. So, which is going to lead me into my first question, which I think is a fair question and a good one. Because of your insight, your education, your knowledge around 12 steps and stuff like that, and as Ben alluded to, having a lot of our clients kind of buy into new concepts or becoming more open-minded, what are some of the things that you've noticed in your years of doing this that it's one of the major like roadblocks to somebody wanting to maybe take the steps towards 12 steps or sobriety in general, stuff like that? And Ben, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but
I do have some I want to say, but I want to hear his answer first.
Okay.
Well, I think the things that are problematic that behaviorally or theoretically become the things that prevent people are also the strengths that allow them to, once they can get that door open, right, are the things that make them zealous and the same strength of their convictions. And probably what I would say is that it's, in my experience, and both personally and professionally, that it's the idea of our default nature, right? Like, so I'm antisocial, right? Which means that I want people to love me and like me. I also think that 99% of the people I know are idiots. So I want validation from people that I don't even respect, right? I am anarchistic at heart, right? Which means that I think that laws are stupid. Like, who said I couldn't have 2 pounds of heroin in the trunk of my car? I mean, what do you expect me to put in a backpack and take it on the bus? That's just not pragmatic, you know? And thirdly, the fact that we are like super anti-authoritarian. Like, if anybody even thinks about telling me what to do, my default setting is F you, 100%. Like, I don't even need to hear it, right? And I mean, you talk about that. We talk about that in terms of the big book, like how many times it says must. And we like pull the wool over people's eyes. Like, even the doctor's opinion says it 9 times, right? But the fact of the matter is the book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little, very last page of the text, right? So I think our ability to be rebellious, what does Bill say in the 12 and 12? That our main characteristic is defiance, right? So that defiance against compliance is the thing that allows me to, once I do comply, and recognize that my compliance is not being forced, but it's a empowered position, that then I can turn that shit around like drastically and use that same kind of defiance to defy the norm of like the stupidity of the rest of the world that tells me that I don't have a neurological disorder, that I'm just weak-willed or shitty, and show them the truth of that, you know?
Good.
My interpretation, my experience with Rabbi Mark is that he caught me off guard. So the year's 2016, and I had told a lady that I would help her open a treatment center from the ground up. We were in West Palm, you recall that. And I'm told, I have no idea to this day, like how anybody met you or came across you, but I just get the message, hey, this guy Rabbi Mark is coming to run your group this morning. Keep an eye out for him. So I'm like, okay. So I hear this bike pull up on the sidewalk, and this dude just barges in, and I'm like, who's this Sons of Anarchy dude here? Like, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, I'm Rabbi Mark. And immediately, like, my attention is caught, right? Where, like, I'm like, I was looking for a rabbi. This does not fit the bill. Jax Teller just walked in the door. Like, what is going on here? But here's where I'm going with this is, we've talked about this constantly on different episodes, where we have to catch the client's attention, the newcomer's attention. And I'll come out and say, like, Mark had my attention right away, where I was like, I had this expectation of like, hey man, I'm waiting for this rabbi to walk in the door, and then this guy comes in, and I was like ready to throw him out. I literally recall, like, if he didn't say who he was, I was going to be like, dude, you're in the wrong place, right? Like, I specifically remember, I'll never forget that day. Like, it's vivid in my mind. But with that being said, the other thing is from my perspective, the way that he explains stuff and breaks stuff down, because sometimes we get some really, really intelligent addicts and alcoholics in here. And again, catching their attention. You look at him, he's in his Converse, and you know, is usually he wears some kind of crazy shirt that's sometimes maybe not even appropriate in public. And you get some guy in here who thinks his IQ is like Einstein, right? And he's judging the book by its cover, and all of a sudden Mark starts talking. And you say, uh-oh, this dude, he caught my attention. Or vice versa, you know, where the young guys, they're like, oh man, I can vibe with this guy. Look at his shirt. He's got a no effects shirt on, like whatever the case may be, you know, and that attraction is important.
Right.
And that experience. And that's what I love about it is the authentic experience that he presents. He doesn't show up here as a Dr. Rabbi Mark.
Right.
He's just another alcoholic junkie. And he makes that very clear. And he doesn't even have to tell us that.
Yeah, you know.
You know, we speak the same language.
So why don't we go into that a little bit? Because Ben, I agree with everything you say, but just tell us a little bit about kind of your past. You know, I know very little. Give us the elevator version of it.
Elevator version is simple. So born and raised in California. San Francisco. Spent the first 6 months of my life in an orphanage. Was put up for adoption in the early 60s. So, of course, I have a deep love for hippies. Not, right? Because who gives up this for adoption? Some burnout junkie in 1961, probably, in San Francisco. So, of course, just finally get adopted. And as luck would have it, Orthodox Jewish Holocaust survivors, emotionally constipated, linear trauma, generational transition of trauma, and 92% Irish. I mean, I don't think you could have wrote a backstory that was more like winning the alcoholic trifecta than me, right? So adopted, abandonment, disorder, rejection, pathology, genetic predisposition to alcoholism in San Francisco, where if you didn't smoke weed by the time you were 12, you went to jail, that kind of a vibe, like legit, that was it, And I got to tell you, it's so weird because I look at my life. My life was not traumatic. My parents were fucking solid, and I went to school and I did well and I didn't even have to study. But I got to tell you, my childhood sucked because it happened to me. That's the extent of my trauma, was my perception of my childhood, right? And how whatever perceived harm, it's funny because I think about what Bill said, the harms that occurred to us, either perceived or real, right? How we create them or not is how we react to them. And let's be frank, I just really like getting shit-faced. Let's be honest. I mean, if I could probably still get drunk and high with impunity and maintain my spiritual elevation in my life and my success in my career and my relationships, dude, I would be high right now. Let's be honest. That's what makes me an alcoholic, right?
I like that you said that about you like getting high.
Yeah.
You like drinking.
Why wouldn't you?
We had a breakthrough in group last night. At least I believe it was a breakthrough with one of our clients who had constantly been told in the past, oh, you drink because of your trauma, because of your childhood, because of what your parents did to you. And Eric, myself, and Hannah all co-facilitated a group together covering the doctor's opinion. Mm-hmm. And that line in there that says we drink essentially because we like the effect. Yeah. That guy was like, wow, you're the first people to tell me I do it because I like it. And I'm like, I've always been trying to tell people that, and nobody believed me. Yeah. Everybody turns around and tells me it's my trauma.
Well, it's crazy because the deeper issue is that it is. And one of my main problems that if I look at my life was that I lived in a black and white reality. Either I was shit or the shit, right? And so there's no cohesion between my life. I was always at double extremes. And the fact is, I get drunk because I like the effect produced. I also get drunk because I have trauma that I don't even know that I have. And it operates in this kind of weird, so there's this law in physics called the law of inverse proportionality, right? Which means if I love something this much, without even knowing it, I dislike its opposite, right? So if I love getting drunk, that means I have a problem with not being drunk, right? And one of the best acronyms for sober is son of a bitch, everything's real, that it's sober,
yeah.
Right?
I haven't heard that one in a long time.
Yeah, son of a bitch, like that old acronym. So the fact is that if I love getting drunk and fucked up, the fact of the matter is I literally have some sort of crisis or problem with reality. And if you look at what I love is I love going to meetings and listening to people read chapter 5 and just waiting for them to read it wrong. And it literally happens 99% of the time, and specifically in the 12th step. Most people say, haven't had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. It doesn't say a result, it says the result, right? Mm-hmm. So the only guarantor of this entire dialectical cognitive process is that I have a spiritual solution, which means that the problem has to be spiritual. So if I get drunk because I love getting drunk, which means I dislike not being drunk, which means I have a problem with reality. Reality, by definition, is a spiritual construct, which means I get drunk because I have a spiritual problem. I don't even know it. And I like getting drunk because that is the solution to my spiritual problem, which means getting drunk is now and always has been my spiritual solution. It's just counterfeit and it doesn't work in the long run. Works every time. I mean, tell me one time that you have been shit-faced and not been shit-faced. You can't.
Like
you can't. Right?
What? I feel like a client right now. The way Tom and I just looked at each other.
What just happened?
Yeah. I didn't mean to sidetrack us on that. I want to go back to hearing a little bit more about your story and whatnot too.
Oh, yeah. I like to drink. That's pretty much it. And so, of course, the standard problems, institutions, death. Well, yeah, death, listen. And, institutions, jails, death. That's my story. Like dumb shit. Like I'm good. And it's crazy because I'm not a dumb man. I just must do dumb shit. And I do it a lot and I don't recognize it.
When did you escape California? And I use a word.
When I got I escaped from Northern California to Southern California because I had way less priors and not so much of a jacket down there. So I escaped there to get sober. I couldn't get sober in San Francisco. I just couldn't. It's weird because it's a city, but it's like a small town. There's only like 6 high schools. You grow up there, everybody, like everybody. And I couldn't. Like there's 99 bars per square mile in San Francisco. Like that's insane, right? It's insane, right? And yeah, and I couldn't. I couldn't. So I did a geographic to get sober, right? But I did it to get sober. And that's when I escaped. And then, of course, just being sober and going to school and going back to school and continuing, I do what I was told to do and what was suggested. And then the benefits of that reigned, eternal. Like that's what occurs. Like the grace has always been reigning. My sobriety just teaches me how to pay attention to it, and catch more. Like you could be the best wide receiver in the league. If you don't look at the quarterback, you ain't catching shit, right? So the spiritual program is a program of teaching you to look at the quarterback. And that's the story of my life. I mean, I struggled, I finished school barely, and then I went back when I was sober, and just, the constant, losing money, making money, losing money, getting arrested, all just the same old shit over and over again. But I think really the moments, like that's the thing, right? It's the moment, right? And it's not the white light. I don't get the virgin on my toast. I'm shaving in a shitty little apartment, and I put like Thrasher Mag and punk rock stickers all over the mirror. So when I look in the mirror, all I can see is like from below my cheeks down, right? So I can't even see myself in the eyes. And I'm like, man, when's the last time I was able to look at myself in the eyes? Like that is the seed, right, that germinates my entire recovery. One moment of thinking, man, I am so disgusted by my own self that I can't even look at myself. And it's not even conscious. Like that was completely subconscious. That's literally it. I mean, it wasn't some giant white light thing. It was just the accumulation.
So you were to the point with yourself, you were more disgusted with yourself in the way that you were living?
Yeah. I mean, look, we talk about bottoms all the time, and even Bill writes about it in the 12 and 12, right? Like that when he talks about step 1, he says that we have saved people 15 years of suffering, that even potential alcoholics, right? That the bottom is up and down. See, I don't buy that shit at all. I think everybody has the same bottom, 100%. And I think that bottom rests.
Try and talk directly into the.
I think that bottom directly represents the hopelessness of the disease of alcoholism, right? Like that's it, right? And I don't care. Like, I mean, like you said, I've been working in treatment a while, and you ever notice like you'll get a kid that's 17, right? And or 19, and he comes in because he's been smoking weed for 2 years. And like there's this weird unspoken hierarchy, right? And so like the other guys are like, oh, try some dope. You're here for weed. Like, what are you talking about, right? Beyond the facts that, Delta-9, which is a psychotropic cannabinoid in weed, is the strongest per volume naturally. Beyond that, beyond the like massive history of anxietal disorders, the idea is that, oh, weed ain't shit. Like you come to treatment for weed. What kind of like, how bad can your bottom be? Well, listen, I don't care if you're living on the street and you're whoring yourself out to get a nickel rock of crack, right? That's a horrible bottom. I'm living in the suburbs. But this kid who shows up at 19, what's his story? Well, his story is when he was 13, he decided to go to MIT for physics, and he never partied and he never did anything, and stayed at home studying and listening to TED Talks so that he could get early admittance into Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Went there at 17, and by the time he was 18, they moved him to a regular dorm, and his roommate smoked weed, and he started smoking weed, and 6 months later, he's standing on top of the dorm. He wants to jump off because his entire plan for life has destroyed, which means his bottom is the same as the guy that's turning tricks, because he has abject, complete hopelessness. The circumstance doesn't mean shit. How I respond to it means everything, right? Because I can look back at the crazy events of my life and go, oh, that was tragic. I should have recognized that. That was stupid. I should have recognized that. But the fact of the matter is it's an aggregate of all that shit. It's me coming to the point where I'm like, how many more times do I have to live in an abject state of hopelessness where the train, where the light at the end of the tunnel is a train that's about to run me over? So that's how I feel. I feel like one of the cool things when you talk about how do you approach a client is that I really believe that everybody has the same bottom. And that single identity, right, of suffering is the thing that allows us to have that point of commonality. And that changes everything. And once I can listen, if I can look at a guy and go, dude, have you ever lied in bed and thought, you know what, if I just wake up dead tomorrow, it'll be all right. And then you wake up and the first thing you do in the morning is you go like this, fuck. Like you don't even have the effort to say the word. You just breathe it out. You say that to any real addict or alcoholic. You're like, dude, I know that.
Yep.
I know that shit. And that's it. That's all you really need. That's how you crack the door open. And that's my story. My story is I could not stand living in my skin without drinking. And it got to the point where I couldn't stand living in my skin when I was.
When did you get sober?
Well, I got sober the first time after I got out in the 90s. And I got about 4 years sober. And I got sober.
When you say got out, what got out of what? Jail?
Just, stuff. Got out of stuff.
Right.
And alleged stuff. Well, anyway, yeah. So
you don't have to go into detail.
Nah, it's
I don't.
fine.
If you're on, you might be on the feds list. I don't know.
I don't even know what you're talking about. But the idea is this. So I was in a halfway in East LA with a bunch of convicts. And
this is what year?
This is probably 94, I think. Okay. The first time I got sober, 94, 95. And I got sucked into and then I moved in Venice and I was tattooing and doing all that kind of happy stuff and, running around. And I got sucked into Club AA. It was great, man. I got really legitimately sober on the fellowship alone, right? It's funny, we were talking about the triangle earlier. That's one of the sides. The unity carried me, right? It really did. I put almost 4 years together and I didn't do shit, man. I went to a ton of meetings. I had a bunch of friends. We would go to shows and clubs every night and we go out. I went 2-3 meetings a day. And what happened was I got a really massive, substantial amount of relief for my existential crisis, for the feelings I had that made me drink, right? I got a lot of relief from those. But what I did not get was freedom because I didn't do any step work. I didn't have a sponsor. Okay, that's not true. I had a sponsor. It was me. I was a very good sponsor. I allowed myself to do what I wanted to do. But literally, all of a sudden, 4 years later, out of nowhere, I'm like skating to the tattoo shop to open it up on the boardwalk at like 10 in the morning. And I got a pint of tequila in my pocket, and I'm drinking like a Hawaiian Punch as a chaser on a longboard in my 30s going, what the fuck happened? Like, how did this happen? I didn't even know how it happened, right? Because I think in retrospect, when I'm honest, part of my story, that relapse, and I only had one relapse, and it was pretty intense. And I hadn't done dope in years, by the way. And I got into, this is so stupid. I got into a fight. So I'll tell this story because it's indicative of how stupid I am, right? So I relapse and I'm drinking, and I'm at a bar in Venice Beach called the Circle Bar. It's called the Circle Bar because it's a giant circle. It was 11 o'clock in the morning, probably on my second, fifth of tequila by this time. And there's this guy, and we're having a discussion, right? Heated, right? And what we're talking about, because I've had time sober and been exposed to people that have a spiritual basis in life, I thought I knew some sort of shit, right? Like, I get it. I know some stuff, right? So we're having this discussion. And this guy is mistakenly under the impression that Siddhartha was not the Prince of India before he became the Buddha. And I knew for a fact that he was, in fact, the Prince of India before he became the Buddha. So I was going to show him how right I was. I'm going to jump off of this bar stool, go over there and headbutt the fuck out of this guy. Because that's the way you prove a spiritual point when you're on your second bottle of tequila at 11 o'clock in the morning in a bar in Venice Beach. And so I did. Only they had that weird step down thing at the bar. And when I jumped off the bar, I inverted my ankle. I fell. I broke my tib in my ankle at 11 o'clock in the morning. So like any good 30-year-old alcoholic, I picked up my longboard and laced up my Chuck Taylors extra tight and walked home 4 blocks on 3 broken bones. Right? And that was the beginning of the end, right, for my drinking. The second time around, right, and there was not these I mean, it's a bad circumstance, but the problem was I owned 2 tattoo shops in Venice. I knew hundreds of people. Nobody would take me to the goddamn ER at 12 noon on a Tuesday afternoon. Nobody. I had to take a damn cab, right? But so I stopped. I walked 2 blocks out of the way, detour 4 blocks to Davy Jones Liquor Locker to get a bottle so I could drink the pain away because I didn't know it was. And then I ended up going, And so I come out of a blackout a few days later in a cast, and I'd started doing opiates again, and for the pain, of course, you're going to manage that. And I'm on the phone with a guy that I got sober with 5 years earlier. He's yelling at me at the top of his lungs. I'm coming to get you, you dumb sack of shit. Da, 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 da. And literally that guy picked me up and took me back to treatment. And the second time I got sober, I wanted to drink every minute of every day for the first 2-3 months. I wanted to get high every minute of every day for the first 2 months. And more than that, I wanted to headbutt and randomly punch dudes in the throat that were smiling at meetings, that were happy, that had some sort of sense of comfort, because I thought they were all full of shit and I hated them, every single one. And so the second time I got sober, the obsession to drink was not lifted like it was the first time. I just could not be happy, right, on any level. I despised everyone. I thought anyone that had any type of serenity was full of shit. And it was the hardest struggle for me. And so that was the thing that allowed me to be so desperate that I was willing to do what anybody told me to achieve a modicum, a small amount of some semblance of comfort in a minute-by-minute basis in my life. And this time I got a sponsor. I did the work. I did all the shit I didn't want to do because I could not do it, or I would have killed myself or somebody else. And listen, I always thought I was a hard guy. I'm a giant baby, I'm really just a child, because the whole idea was simple. I thought, only chicken shits kill themselves. Yeah, I was too big of a chicken shit to kill myself, right? So I'm like on crutches with a 9 in the back of my pants going, I'll go get in a gunfight in Ghost Town. I know how to do that. That's the way real men die. I was afraid of everything, and I didn't even know it. That's why fear is such a massive.
I wanted to ask you, what was the difference between your first go round in sobriety and the second? Because the first time you said that it gave you that relief that you didn't know that you needed, but you got.
Right.
And then the second time, and I think this kind of, and let me know what you guys think. This kind of ties in a little bit to the sense of when they say each relapse, it gets harder. Why do you think the second time getting sober, I mean, you knew what sobriety had to offer because you experienced it. You knew the freedoms from the emotional bankruptcy, the spiritual, all that stuff. Like, why do you think the second time you were just like so angry and wanted to kill everybody?
I'll tell you why, because I don't think I knew the freedoms
the first time.
Right. I think I had the relief, right? So, and
you said that.
And that's the difference, right?
Yeah.
Like, I got relief drinking.
Right.
I got relief doing dope, right? Because it was that modicum of comfort that, like, where I was distracted and it was fleeting and it passed. And that's what relief is. It's temporary, right? It comes and it goes. It's transient, yeah? But freedom is crazy, because when you have freedom from an emotional or existential crisis, you never need relief from it again. That doesn't mean that something new is going to be revealed. It's maybe more subtle, right? Or a little bit more painful, or a little painful in a different place. But it does reinforce the fact that you have the capacity to achieve freedom from those things, 100%. And that's the difference. I didn't do any of the work. And I had the obsession to drink removed immediately. And listen, I'm a real alcoholic. Like, I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and roll over and drink a half a pint, and then drink some Coca-Cola and roll back over to finish my night of sleep, because otherwise I would have a seizure or not be able to sleep or flop around. And then I would take a shot in the morning and I'd brush my teeth in the shower, because 9 times out of 10 I'd throw up, right? It's gag reflex. I was like a legit real alcoholic, garden variety alcoholic. I could not drink. And the first time I got sober, all of a sudden the obsession was gone. And in retrospect, that was the worst thing that happened to me. Because by 4 years, I didn't do any work. I just hung around with a bunch of guys that partied sober, went to a bunch of clubs, went to a bunch of meetings, had a blast, which is great, but that's all I had. I only had unity, which means only was carried by the fellowship. And when that started to lose its appeal or that relief wore out, I was stuck with the same shit I needed freedom from in the first place. And that's why I drank. I talked myself into thinking, you know what? Maybe it was a bad patch because I was a real drunk. For me to get sober that easy, 20-year bad patch nonetheless. Right? And I think that the pain that I really didn't understand what the gift of desperation was until I had the gift of desperation. Right? The misery was so intense that it was really the arbiter that forced me to do the work I had to do.
I'm glad that you mentioned relief versus freedom. Because when I'm dope sick and I'm out there, I enter detox based off this idea that I want some relief.
Yep.
I can't wait to get into that Suboxone line at the detox and get better. But at some point, if you don't have a mindset change to, I need to acquire freedom from this. So I see that pitfall all the time. People come in, they get the relief. Mm-hmm. We see it all the time. They don't continue with treatment, for instance. They don't go on to meetings, et cetera, because they got that relief and they're like, I got this now. But if you don't seek that absolute freedom at some point or come to the realization you need to take steps to do that, you're screwed, in my opinion.
And it's crazy because I think that's one of the things that without even knowing it drove me to work in the field, right? Because I was tattooing and hustling and doing what I was doing the first time I was sober. I didn't even consider going back to school, studying psychology, getting whatever, all that. I didn't even consider that shit at all, And I think that subconsciously, the recognition of the need for freedom over the desire for relief is what drove me to help people understand that. I think that might be one of the main pivot points that moved me into working in the field of recovery without even knowing it.
That's also chapter 2. There's a solution talks about where we come in and out of fear, we join a fellowship.
Oh, yeah.
But then it also, in my experience, the fellowship will eventually fail you if I don't have what the book recommends, having a vital spiritual experience. Yep. Why, in your opinion, or however you explain it, why do you feel that the fellowship eventually fails? What would you say to that?
Well, because the fellowship is good. Okay, so let's go back to this idea of the triangle, right? Mm-hmm. Before we started, we were talking about why is the circle triangle no longer the symbol.
Let me pause you there real quick. I want you to explain that because some people may not know what you're referring to when you say triangle.
Okay. So up until the printing of the 4th edition in 2001, there was a symbol that was indicative or representative of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a circle with an equilateral triangle in the middle. Okay. And it was a copyright for 50 years as part of the symbol of AA. And it was on the very first big book. And in fact, here's the original old school one, had the AA in the middle of it, right? Mm-hmm. And it said Recovery Unity Service. Because what that represented was the 3 legacies of Alcoholics Anonymous. So when Bill composed this, he took the 6, actually really the 5 principles of decent living from the Oxford group. He doubled them, then expanded them, did a little bit more work. And then he got into the traditions. He understood the nature of that. And then finally, he developed the concepts and the warranties of AA, which guarantee rights and how do we continue to manifest my obligation to make sure that this society continues to exist. Because AA is not a group. It's not a fellowship. It is a society. And like all societies, it has requirements. And the 3 sides of the triangle are the requirements for membership in good standing in this society. If you're American, there's going to be a political requirement, right? There's going to be a religious or philosophical kind of requirement, and there's going to be a membership requirement. And to be an American, you're either a citizen, either naturalized or born here, right? The religious construct of America is what's considered the Judeo-Christian classic construct, and the political leaning is that of a true republic, right? So those are the 3 things that form the society of the United States of America. AA as well, 3 things: recovery, unity, and service. The base of the triangle is recovery, which represents the 12 steps, okay? The 12 steps are for my internal spiritual growth, right? The 12 steps says, having had a spiritual awakening is the result of these steps. I do that work to assuage my existential spiritual crisis, right? Why am I alive? Why do I sabotage? Why do I feel different? Why is my misery? Me. It's all about me. But it has to be about me because if I don't get the me shit right, I can't get the you shit right, which is what the unity is. The unity is the 12 traditions. And the 12 traditions are designed to encourage and develop interpersonal spiritual development, right? And it's really interesting when you read the steps in the second writing from Bill, 13 years later when he explains them in the 12 and 12. He really brings that in. I mean, if you open the 12 and 12 into the fourth step on page 53, he says, the primary fact that we fail to recognize is our total inability to have a true partnership with another human being. That means my primary problem is not that I like to drink tequila, shoot heroin, and do armed robberies. My primary problem is I don't think I'm good enough, which means every relationship I have is based on a fraudulent or a front of who I want to be, which means it's not authentic, which means I can never have an intimate relationship, right? And then the third side of the triangle is service. So the base is recovery, internal spiritual development. Unity, which is the group and the fellowship, interpersonal spiritual development. And finally, the 12 concepts of service, which is charitable or what's called transpersonal spiritual development, right? So the steps prevent me from suiciding, the traditions prevent me from homiciding, and the concepts prevent me from genociding, right? Heal myself, heal my community, heal the world in an expanding consciousness. That's what Bill envisioned, right? 42 spiritual concepts, including the 6 warranties of the 12th concept, which are the rights of the individual.
Catch all that, Tom?
No. Yeah. And because it's a society and it has intricate requirements, right? Mm-hmm. And so if I want to be a member in good standing, I have to live in all 3 sides of the triangle, right? Because let's say I go to meetings and I do some step work, right? So I'm definitely got the fellowship and I feel the support of my fellows and they carry me. But the book itself says, right, our reliance in things human has failed us. If you look at the fear inventory on page 68, Bill asks a simple question. We write down our fears even though we have no resentment in connection with them, and we ask, why do we have them? What's the answer? Self-reliance fails. Correct. And self-reliance is reliance on other people, other things human, which always fails me. I need to rely on a power greater than myself to empower me to be a better man. Very simple. So if I do a little bit of step work, but I got that unity, I get carried. But because my expectations on humanity is a flawed expectation, it's never going to work out the way I want it, which means eventually someone's going to trip through no malicious fault of their own and drop me when they're carrying me. You know, it's like the guy that stage dives at the show, but people are distracted and he smashes the ground, right? Like that's the kind of vibe, yeah? And so if you're just relying on others to carry you, you have to understand that everyone has their own trauma. And when I rely on others, I am not engaged in unity. I'm engaged in parasitic development. That's why Bill called self-sufficiency a defect of character, not a strength. You know what's self-sufficient? A tick. Jumps on a dog, sucks the blood, jumps off the dog, finds another dog. When Bill writes the tradition, he talks about autonomy, right? What is autonomy? I find my potentiality. I connect to a higher power, which empowers me to reach my potential, which I then bring to the community, which raises the entire community so that I can rely on them to save me when I need it, right? All the traditions have spiritual underlying in it as well. First tradition, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on AA unity, which means I don't get sober unless I sacrifice my ego to make sure you guys are sober, because for a fact, I'm going to need you to pull my ass out of the fire. 100%. Sooner or later, probably sooner. Yeah? Which makes it selfish. But Bill, as in most great thinkers, understood that selfishness is part of the human equation. If I'm aware of my actions, I cannot be selfless. I can only decide to be positively selfish or negatively selfish. or my old negative selfishness. When I live only in unity, I rely on you to fulfill me, which means I benefit at your expense. But when I live in all three sides of the triangle, in the full fellowship, when I engage in all three of those spiritual developments, I live in positive selfishness, where I benefit at your benefit.
I like your take on that because I never thought of it was selfishness, but I bring it up a lot of times when I'm speaking with guys, my sponsees in particular, where I talk about ego. In the rooms all the time, we hear that ego is what takes us back out at blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, if I'm honest with myself, how many times has ego saved me?
Yep.
Now, I'll throw it out there. I can't rely on ego. However, I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't care what other people think. I want to look like a good sponsor. I want to look like I have my AA knowledge in a meeting. And once in a while, I'm having a bad day. I go in there and I BS solely off of ego to sound good and present well. Once in a while, that'll carry me for a little bit. I can't fully rely on that, but I'll call it what it is. Because if I didn't care what other people think, I'd be like, screw everybody. I'm not going to that meeting tonight. I'm not going to try and sound good tonight. And then I'd fall off. So, I like how you put selfishness can be an asset or a defect. Same thing with ego. I've always looked at it like that. Ego has saved my ass more than once.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Listen, and not only that, but oddly enough, if you go into that meeting and you bullshit and you riff on the ego, you still may save the life of somebody else without even knowing it.
Yes.
And that's the crazy part about it. Listen, ego does get a bad rap. And it started even with Henry Thibault, right? The Thibault Papers, right? Who was a friend of AA in the early days, talked about diminishment and destruction of the ego. But listen, if you don't have proper ego strength, you're going to die. You have to. You can't you cannot fulfill the potentiality of your existence and contribute to the community at large. It's impossible.
What's interesting is, I don't know that if I've ever shared this on the podcast, but I would have to say that the individual within the 12-step fellowship who had the greatest influence on me as far as the message that they carried, unbeknownst to me, behind closed doors, this guy was partaking in behaviors which I would highly consider objectionable, which came out later. But like you said, it didn't change the fact that the message that I heard from him in those meetings is the one that inspired me more than anybody else to this day. And because so oftentimes I'll hear folks complain, oh, their message is good, but they're full of crap. You should see them outside. I don't care. The newcomer doesn't know that. And if you take what they're saying and apply it to yourself, would there be a negative consequence to that if they're good principles? Most likely no. So it's I'd like to drop that judgment a lot of times of what people are doing outside of meetings. Because also the other thing is, I'm a believer, if you say the right things long enough, eventually your actions may catch up. Where
I think in a perfect world that makes sense, but we live in a very imperfect world. And, most, especially down here in South Florida, I mean, the recovery community is very large, but it's also very small. So it's hard to escape, like say for instance, now granted I'm married, have kids and have no desire to go to strip clubs or anything of the sorts. But in the event that I did, I see what you're saying. And I understand the premise behind it. Like for the newcomers, if they hear this message, so on and so forth, like they don't know how I'm acting outside of the rooms. But you just never know. Like somebody sees me walking. I'll tell you this. I smoke cigars. And there was an instance where I didn't have a cigar. And all the cigar shops were closed. And the only place that had cigars is ABC Liquors. And I went to ABC Liquors to walk in to get a cigar. And I got a text from somebody saying, why are you walking into ABC Liquors?
It's epic.
And I'm like,
I never heard this story.
Legit, I'm going to get a cigar, And So I say that as an example. Like, I understand what you're saying, but you never know who's going to, like, that's just not a reality that I would want to live in. You know, it's hypocritical. I understand it. And that's why I say in a perfect world, I understand the premise behind it, but it's not, I don't know, Rabbi Mark, what do you think?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? So there's a couple sides. So first side is my story, and it is 100% true and factual, regardless of the veracity of the facts. You understand? Like, if I tell you my story, it's my story. If the California Department of Corrections tells you my story, it's going to sound vastly different. You understand? Doesn't mean that neither of them are not correct, right? Gotcha. So perspective is huge. The second thing is, what you said is the key. We don't live in a perfect world. We are flawed humans, right? So if I want to live in all three sides of the triangle to the best of my ability, I want to be self-driven, community-driven, world-driven, right? I want to live as an exemplar. And this is the key. So there's two sides. One side is, and this sucks, in recovery in general and in early recovery specifically, many times the appearance of impropriety is worse than actually being improper. Yeah? Because if I catch a jacket, like let's say I get sober and I'm down here in South Florida, and I'm not a Delray FB, you know, but I'm definitely looking to meet somebody, you know what I'm saying? So I'm cruising meetings and I'm going to the Saturday night speaker meeting because it's a bit of a fashion show. I mean, I got sober in LA. That was everywhere, like everywhere. Like you go to Fountain in Fairfax or Highland, or you go to the Venice meeting on a Saturday night, or the CA meeting at Brotman Hospital. It was a fashion show. It was like, you're like, damn, you know? So I'm looking to get it in, let's just say, because I want somebody
This is all hypothetical.
Correct.
This isn't you.
Listen, because I want to be validated because I'm needy and pathetic, right? But what I forget is that I'm also a sociopath, which means if I find somebody that validates me and I don't validate myself, I'm literally letting somebody with a lower standard than me validate me, and then I don't figure out why it works, right? So I wouldn't date myself. But if you're going to date me, that means I meet your standard, which means I'm not the man I want to be, but I'm the man that's good enough for you, which means I seek validation from somebody with a lower standard than me, and I can't figure out why it doesn't work. Just throwing that out there.
Am I the person I'm looking for is looking for?
Correct. Right? Correct. Right? Like that's why a lot of times you get that sex inventory. The optimum person is what you should be. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I want this, right? So I'm looking around for this kind of a thing. And let's say I catch a jacket, and the jacket is that maybe I may have slept with a couple newcomers, right? And that's
hang on. I think you're using LA slang here. What's catching a jacket mean?
Okay. That means that I get a reputation for some unsavory behavior vis-a-vis the opposite sex.
Did you know what that meant?
Yeah, I follow.
Oh, okay.
Vis-a-vis the opposite, vis-a-vis the opposite sex, right? And or the same sex, whatever my goal is, right? So I'm definitely like getting it in.
Yeah.
And but because I'm sticking around and I hear the message, regardless of who says it, and it does start to inculcate me and saturate my brain to the point where if I don't actually start living this way, I do run the risk of leaving because I feel fraudulent and not the same as the people around me that are actually having results in recovery. Mm-hmm. So I get serious and I start doing step work and I do this, that, and the other. And then 3 years down the line, I literally fall in love with somebody. And maybe that person has 6 months less than me or 9 months less than me. And their sponsor goes, oh, yeah, I know him when he came in. You can't date him. He's a predator because I got that jacket, right? And so the impropriety or the appearance of that could, in fact, be worse than the actual impropriety. Because, I mean, listen, there's a lot of people that sleep their way through their first year of sobriety. That shit is everywhere. It just is what it is, right? And for a newcomer, is it inappropriate? Maybe, maybe not. You know, and what I did when I had 5 years sober, I would not do when I had 10 years sober. And what I did when I had 10 years sober, I wouldn't even consider doing when I had 15, and so on and so forth, right? So as I get freedom from these emotional crises, they start to be revealed more subtle and sophisticated ones. And I have to re-up my game. How do I have a routine that doesn't become routine, right? it expands in consciousness. It gets harder and harder based on lesser and lesser trial, right? The things that I do now are way more emotionally strained for me. So, yes, you can possibly do it. And yes, we're in an imperfect society. And again, this is what it boils down to. My entire life, I had to be this way or that way, black or white. The fact of the matter, it's both of those things. There are people, right? My goal is to be a spiritual exemplar to the guys that I live with, the guys that I share my life with, the guys that I sponsor, the guys who sponsor me, to the guys that I work with, to be in that environment where I live the way I act, right? Like, that's why the traditions are about interpersonal relationships. They really are. I mean, take the 11th tradition, right? Random ass tradition, right? What is it? That our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need to maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and film. What the hell does that have to do with how I interact with other people? Well, a lot. Well, what's my press? What do people say about me? What's my radio? What kind of shit do I say about other people? And what's my film? Do my words and my actions, are they congruent? Do they make me a man of dignity and integrity that is attractive to the newcomer who wants to learn the message?
I've never experienced this, but I have a sponsee who actually has 3 times as much sobriety time as I do. We went through the 12 steps out of the big book together, but just for a new experience. But he takes his sponsees through when they're done with the steps out of the big book and utilizes traditions and say, how can you apply these to your life? And his knowledge on traditions far exceeds mine, but sounds like the same kind of principle or idea that you're talking about.
Well, if the traditions are about the group's about unity. That's all about interpersonal relationship. Mm-hmm. That's the whole point. I gotta live in all 3. So it's both and. It's not that I'm not a guy that goes to the titty bar but still tries to preach the word of recovery. I'm both of those things because I'm human and I'm flawed, and maybe I'm insecure, and maybe I have problems with interpersonal relationships, specifically in the romantic area, and maybe I continue to sabotage and I continue to seek validation from people that have a lower conscientious level than me, but I'm trying not to be. It's crazy. Like, so there's this thing in Judaism where there's different levels of orthodoxy. Like, some people are very, very religious, and some people are less religious, and some people are not religious at all. And there's this thing in the Talmud that says when you ask somebody how religious they are, you don't say, well, how religious are you? If you want to know, like, say they keep the Sabbath, they say, do you keep the Sabbath? The traditional response that's written in the Talmud is that the person is asked if they keep the Sabbath, they say yes. And if they don't, they say, not yet. Not yet. Because the word for level in Hebrew is madrega, which is a rung on a ladder. So if I'm trying to move up, there's going to be rungs I have not hit yet. It's inevitable, right? So the thing is, and again, it's crazy. It's like the 7-step prayer, right? I say, I am removed from me all, right, the defects of character which stand in the way of my usefulness to like people I would help. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding, right? I ask God to really take away the parts of my character that are maladaptive, whether I know them or not, that stand in the way of my usefulness, right? Could it be said that some people may consider me a little edgy, or, to be frank, a bit of a dick? The answer to that is yes, 100%. I can absolutely be a dick, right? Would I prefer to be like the Zen guy that floats in on the cloud of spiritual enlightenment in like saffron robes, like the Dalai Lama, just throwing out pearls of wisdom? Like, you see those guys periodically in meetings, like they say like 2 words, you're like, holy shit, like it changes your life. Like those guys, just like, wow, right? Do I want to be that guy? Of course I want to be that guy. Would that guy make me more or less effective in what I do and how I live? I don't know. I got to trust that God knows, which means I got to be willing to throw it all up in the air, and what lands and what doesn't. And I cannot use that as an excuse to go, well, that one about going to the bar, going to gamble on Tuesday, playing poker on Saturday night. Like, I don't know if that one's the one I can do. I don't get to choose that shit. I have to be desirous of them all going. And then I have to try to analyze why some don't leave, and whether it's me or whether there's a higher purpose for that utility. See, I like Dr. Bob. He really was one of those guys, those Pearl of Wisdom's guys, right? And there's a thing that he says, it's in As Bill Sees It. It's on page 3, I think. It says, I used to commiserate with all people who suffer. Now I only feel bad for those who suffer in ignorance. They do not understand the purpose and ultimate utility of pain. I have to be willing for all the pain to be gone, but I have to realize that some of it I don't get to choose. And there's a reason, and that shit may be above my pay grade.
I don't know about you, Ben, but my mind's a little blown.
Yeah, my gears are smoking up in here.
Yeah. It's been an hour.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just saying, like, I looked over at it, and it feels like we've been sitting here 20 minutes.
Yep.
Rabbi Mark.
I don't even know. I'm
not.
Well, it's funny.
I'm kind of unsure as to. I mean, great message, by the way. But I'm.
What do you title this one? Is
I
that what
don't
you're
know.
gonna ask?
What do I title this?
We just call it Rabbi Mark's AMA. Isn't that some Reddit thing? Ask me anything.
Oh, there you go. Ask me anything.
Or it could be
yeah.
AMN. Ask me nonsense.
One of my favorite things to do is after his group, I go in and I look at the whiteboard when nobody else is in there. And I'm like, what the hell happened?
Yeah, there's a lot of random shit written
I
on the
see
whiteboard.
just random words and then like...
Well, I use a lot of like arrows and like flow charts that I make up myself. I don't really...
And things are like half spelled out, but you know what they are.
Because I can't spell. I literally am the most dyslexic. I can't even say the... Oh, God. I don't think I knew how to... And it's another thing. Here's another part of my trauma story, right? I didn't know how to read until I was 7, right? I went to public schools in San Francisco. Back then in the 60s, they gave you the IQ test, which means I couldn't take the test because I didn't know how to read, which means I was on the short bus for 2nd and 3rd grade. And then my dad, I don't know where he figured this out, but he had some friend that was a neurologist, who knows. And, he sent me to the Evelyn Wood School of Speed Reading, which is like some rando thing, right, in the 70s. So I'm like 8 years old, 3 nights a week for 3 hours in this class with like 36-year-old lawyers that are learning to read quicker. And I learned to read.
Did you enjoy that?
I don't know. Probably not. I probably hated every minute of it.
That's what I was wondering, because I know now you talk about how much you love to read.
Yeah, that's all I do, really. I mean, I do that all the time. Like, I read all kinds of shit.
What kind of books do you read?
I read like stupid books and non-scholarly books simultaneously. I like to bounce. I read 2 books at once. One is nonsense, just some random, who knows, fiction bullshit. And then usually I'll read a scholarly book or a nonfiction book, or I'll be in a patch of like peer-reviewed papers from Scholar Nexus. Like I just got done reading a 60-page paper called Cannabis Use Disorder and the False Security of Anxiety, talking about the ramifications of D9 on developmental anxiety disorders in recovery and untreated that turn into schizo and schizoaffective disorders. That's why weed is so violent now. You know that weed's the most violent drug industry in the country right now, the weed industry. Because
violent as in like
violent as in people
violence?
people shooting the hell out of each other constantly. Well, because like so the whole weed thing came in on this back end of NORML, which was the National Organization to Reform Marijuana legislation in the 70s in California, in a failed attempt to legalize it for recreational use, and they jumped on that whole medical train. There's zero evidence about efficacy and medicinal use of marijuana, maybe some D9, maybe some CBD usage, but there's been a pharmaceutical CBD available for 40 years called Marinol, and it's synthetic. You can make it as strong as you need to because CBD needs to be crazy strong to be effective. Like it's really impossible to get efficacious one out of flower. But the difference is that the marijuana world sees it not as a drug, but as a lifestyle. And through genetic modifications, the D9, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is a GABAergic cannabinoid, has increased in crazy high strength, right, since the cannabis cup of the 80s. And so what it does is it replaces a naturally occurring cannabinoid that regulates anxiety in your brain. So people that smoke chronically all have anxiety disorders, but they argue they don't because the euphoria of being high makes them think they don't have an anxiety disorder, but they do. And consistently what happens with untreated anxiety is it turns into schizophrenia or psychotic episodes.
That's where I thought you were going with that.
Which is why the weed industry is so dangerous, because listen, what do we know about the dope world? Most people don't violate Biggie's fourth commandment. You don't get high on your own supply. If you're a player if you're a player, you don't do your own dope, man. You don't. The problem is in the cannabis industry, every major player smokes weed, and they smoke their own product, and they smoke it constantly. So they all have dissociative episodes, and that's why they call that shit Murder Mountain. They're killing each other up in Northern California. All over the place.
I've seen that.
It's ridiculous.
Murder Mountain? Is that like a documentary or something?
Yeah.
And that's on Netflix.
Really?
Yeah, you should watch it. It's pretty good.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, it's about
Police don't go up in there. It's been a while since I've seen that.
Oh, it's Wild West. I grew up in Northern California.
Yeah.
That shit was Wild West back then, but it was all burnout hippies. Like we go up and do trim, and we'd come back with giant garbage bags full of trim. And back then it was like the dildo buds because there was no hydroponics. That shit was all outside. Literally, you get like beat a robber away with these things. So the trim would be like, golf ball sized nugs everywhere, right? And but now there's like all these like weird like festy kids that go up and then they disappear. They like just disappear, like because they get them to work for them and then they turn them into slaves and then they kill them after a couple of years.
Yeah, the cartels are all up.
Yeah, it's really bad. It's bad. Federal lands, there's shootouts all the time. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Wow.
People think that stuff doesn't happen in the U.S.
Oh, it does. It's everywhere, and especially in NorCal, it's out of control. It's out of control up there. Yeah.
And this is fun.
Yeah, it's because people do their own product. Fucks them all up. Ooh, I said the F word. My bad.
No, you're good. Yeah, you're good. I think we do need to. I would like to do another podcast episode, though, on your experience with cannabis and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's one of we don't talk about it enough.
Yeah, it's not talked about enough, 100%.
Yeah, and I think it definitely should.
Yeah, I've been really worried about the effects on it exacerbating schizophrenia.
Oh yeah, it's really bad. We're going to see in the next 10 years, we're going to see some really bad data chunks, some real good sections.
I think we're seeing it already with the 20, 23, 25.
Just look how many people are showing up in treatment for cannabis now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Listen, I'm not saying that harm reduction is not an effective protocol in treatment. In fact, it's used all over the world. And so a marijuana harm maintenance or harm reduction protocol is great. But now they're pitching drug replacement therapy with marijuana maintenance. So the problem is you're going to end up with people with massive anxiety disorders and leaning towards violence because of schizophrenia. That is the result of that untreated anxiety disorder, which means they're either going to get violent, get arrested, or end up back in their drug of preference, which tends to be opiates, because the D9 does have efficacy in diminishing the desire for opiates. So it fits into the receptor, into the dopamine receptor.
That makes sense. When I smoked weed, I had no desire to do pain pills. When I did pain pills or heroin, I had no desire to smoke weed.
Yeah.
Usually I was doing heroin, so I didn't smoke weed. But
better. Let's be real.
Something totally
Fiscally
random.
yeah.
Something totally random, and I want to start doing this on the podcast. I watched a Netflix documentary last night. It's taken me two nights to finish. Really interesting. Remember the soccer kids in Thailand? They got caught in that cave.
Yeah.
There's a show on it on Netflix. It's 6 episodes, and it's actually like a series. It's not a documentary, but it's like a show that they reenacted. Pretty fascinating. It's called the Thai Cave Rescue or something. Crazy.
What do they call those docudramas or something?
Yeah.
Is that the one where they
right.
sent like the Thai Navy SEALs in there?
Yep.
And one of them died.
Yeah, and there was like some South African guys that went in and volunteered and dove.
There were divers from like 7 or 8 different countries. Yeah. And then what they ended up, do you want me to tell you guys?
Yeah.
What they ended up doing,
I'm going to have time,
is because the waters were, they were in there 18 days, these kids and their coach. And so what happened was basically they had finished soccer practice one day, and the plan was to go to this caves, which a few of them have been there plenty of times because it's a like a touristy type place, cave whatever. So they go after practice and they go into this cave. Long story short, it starts raining really, really, really bad. Well, they're too deep into the cave. And by the time they turn around to come out, there's what's called T-junction in the cave. And it's like a fork in the road. Well, it's flooded. So they can't get through. They can't get out the cave. And it just continues to keep raining. And it's June. Rainy season in Thailand doesn't start until July. So everybody's like, oh crap, this is really unexpected. Well, it starts getting worse and worse and worse. And they end up in like one of the deepest parts of the cave for 18 days. And the Thai Navy SEALs are involved. Like the whole world is watching this go down. And they tried drilling into the side of the mountain, and they couldn't drill into the side of the mountain because of whatever reason. I don't know. The oxygen was running out. So they were having to try and pump oxygen into the cave, the water. So they're constantly on this like time crunch to get these kids out. And they were able to get Navy SEALs in there to start give them food and stuff. Well, the Americans come over, and the Thai Navy SEALs and them, they didn't really have the resources or the food to give them that would stay good, and they're having to take it in to them through scuba diving, cave diving. I mean, the best of the world are over there doing these dives, and the currents and stuff. And they tied a rope from the entry point of the cave the whole way. And it's like a couple of miles in.
Cave diving is like super dangerous on the best of circumstances.
Yeah. And so so anyways, the Americans come over and they bring over these MREs. And so they're able to get these kids a bunch of MREs and stuff. And so now they have food and stuff. But then it starts like really raining, and the caves are going to flood, and they have like basically a day to get everybody out. And so they're like, what do we do? And the only option is to have these kids scuba dive out. And they're like, how are we going to teach these kids how to scuba dive in a day or two when we have the best of the world here that are having trouble, and one died? Yeah. And so they're like, and so they end up calling this doctor who he's what's the word? An esthetist. He's a doctor, and he maybe, and he puts you on. It's the
anesthesiologist.
It's not him though. It's something like that. But he's also an expert cave diver, and they call him in from Australia, and him and his buddy come, and they come up with this idea that, okay, the only way that this is going to work is if we give them a Xanax. Yeah. And shoot them up with ketamine and knock them out. And they tie their hands and their feet together
and just pull them out with it.
And they put a water bottle in between their ankles to keep their legs buoyant. And they end up strapping these kids to their stomach, and they're face down, and they're in full pressurized masks. And so these kids are knocked out cold, and they're literally breathing, scuba diving through these caves. And they end up getting them all out with like an hour to spare.
That's insane.
Dude, it is crazy. Like and I'm like watching it, and I'm like, get him out, get it, And anyways, cool.
There's
cool
a reason I like PCP and ketamine. I'm just saying.
There you go. So that was kind of random.
Bit of a wonder drug, actually. It's impossible to overdose on ketamine.
Really?
Yeah. For real?
Yep.
What about the K-hole deal?
Yeah. So, first
Make
of all,
this quick because we got to wrap this up.
Technically, every time you're high, it's technically an overdose, right? Because it's a dosage above what the drug is supposed to do in terms of its efficacy. Yeah. So, but a physical death overdose or terminal overdose comes from toxicity, right? Where the LD50 or the lethal dose curve crosses the tolerance curve. And you can't do it with ketamine because it's not a respiratory depressant. So you can't. But the crazy thing is ketamine and PCP, which are for all intents and purposes the same drug, aerocyclohexamine and phencyclidine, that they are. They're excellent.
I'm just how do you know this?
I don't know. I have no idea how I know. But so the crazy thing is those two drugs have the single largest rate of accidental overdose death in first-time users. It's impossible to overdose and die from this drug, yet it has the highest rate of death from first-time accidental overdose.
How's that possible?
Because people get high as fuck and think that they can fly and jump off of buildings because it's based on behavioral toxicity. Listen, if you see a full-grown man buck-ass naked running at the police, it's about 100% probability that he has smoked freaking PCP.
Yeah.
100%.
There was that video that was going viral for a while. The guy, it was some guy that was running through the parking garage butt naked and ran headfirst into the tail end of
that
a minivan.
Did you see that?
No, I didn't, but I'm going to go look it up.
Oh, dude.
Like full speed.
Full speed.
Oh.
Superman.
Shatters the whole back windshield out of this van and then gets up and starts running again.
Yeah, because those drugs are analgesics. They are the best pain killers. And they're good because they're not respiratory depressants.
Yeah.
That's why they use them in animals.
Oh, interesting. All right, we got to wrap this up. Ben, any final thoughts?
No, I got to.
Rabbi Mark, we're definitely
case
having
coming
you
in.
back for part 2.
I'm in.
We got a couple good ones, man, that we did today. Rabbi Mark and Jordan.
Yeah,
Jordan's my
Myers.
buddy.
Yeah.
I know Jordan well.
I'll send you that link. You'll love to hear that.
That's awesome.
All right, that is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And in the end, we want to help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.
Thank you.